This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video we're going to walk through Lesson 30 in Alvarez's Latin Grammar, and you can see the title here of Lesson 30 is Pronominum Declinatio, the declension of pronouns. And so, as you can see, there are a number of declension charts showing us the forms and meanings of the different pronouns, and we're going to walk through these declensions together in this lesson. You're going to have to work to memorize these forms and complete the quizzes in the lesson. But what's exciting about a lesson like this, as you've seen with the noun and adjective lessons you've already studied, is that you can go back to your Latin readings and suddenly understand the meaning of all of the forms that you've been seeing and translating for all of this time. So these grammar lessons are very helpful, and I think you'll enjoy the benefits of memorizing these declension charts as we finish this lesson. So let's walk through Lesson 30 together and look at the declension of pronouns. I'm going to zoom in here so we can look at one declension at a time. Now, what we have here is the first person personal pronoun. The first person personal pronoun. Unfortunately, this text that we have here has the translations of the declension into Italian. So you can ignore all of the words in italics because that's Italian. We're going to translate these forms into English. But this is the first person personal pronoun. We see singular, the number, and then we see the cases, nominative, and then we have the form of the pronoun in that number and case. And we see the first form, the nominative singular, is ego, ego, and ego means I. We then see the genitive singular, and we see the form is mei, mei, of me, mei. We then see the dative mihi, mihi. Mihi means to me or for me. Mihi. Next we have the accusative case, me, me. You see there's no vocative in this first person plural because we would never refer to ourselves with a pronoun. We would never call to ourselves with a pronoun, and therefore there's no pronoun in the vocative case here for the first person. And then lastly, we have the ablative form, me, which means from me, me, from me. So we'll memorize ego, mei, mihi, me, me. This is the declension of the first person singular pronoun. As we look below, we can see that we also have plural first person personal pronouns, starting with the nominative nos, which means we. Nos, we. The genitive plural can be either nostrum or nostri. Nostrum or nostri, and that means of us. The dative is nobis, to or for us. The accusative is nos, us. There's no vocative case, just as there wasn't for the singular. And the ablative plural is nobis, from us. Nos, nostrum or nostri, nobis, nos, nobis. This is the declension of the first person personal pronoun in the plural number. So we have both the singular and the plural forms of the first person personal pronoun. Ego, mei, mihi, me, me. Nos, nostrum, nobis, nos, nobis. Now let's move forward and look at the second personal pronoun. The second personal pronoun is tu in the singular, and we see it here, tu, which means you. We then see the genitive singular, tui, tui, of you. Then tibi, tibi, which means to or for you. We then see the accusative singular, te, you. We see here that the second person personal pronoun does have an ablative case, and we see o tu, o you, o tu. That's the vocative case. And then lastly, the ablative singular case is te, from you, singular. Tu, tui, tibi, te, tu, te. And then just like in the first person, we have a plural second person. The nominative for the plural of the second person personal pronoun is vos, vos, which means you all. We'll say you all to remember that this is plural, you all. The genitive of the plural is vestrum or vestri. Vestrum or vestri, and that means of you all. Then we see the dative vobis, which means to or for you all. The accusative vos, which means you all. O vos means oh, you all, the vocative case. And then lastly, a vobis, the ablative case, from you all. Vos, vestrum, vobis, vos, vos, vobis. That gives us the singular and plural forms of the second person personal pronoun. Now below, I'll zoom out here for a minute. So far we've learned, and let me just make this clear, we've learned the first person personal pronouns, and we've learned the second person personal pronouns. All of the rest that you see on your screen here, except for sui, ignore sui for a minute, but all of these pronouns down here are third person personal pronouns. So we have the first person, ego and nos, the second person, tu and vos, and then we have a bunch of third person personal pronouns. Before we get into the third person personal pronouns, let's take a look at sui, which is a strange pronoun. You'll notice that there is no nominative case for sui, no vocative case, and that's true in the singular and in the plural. No nominative case. Very strange. We'll understand why in a moment. When we refer to this pronoun, we refer to it by the name of the genitive singular, sui. But check this out. The singular forms are the same as the plural. Sui, sibi, se, singular. Sui, sibi, se, plural. As I said, sui is a strange pronoun. Sui is what's called a reflexive pronoun. and I'll write that up here just to remember. Sui is a reflexive pronoun. It's a pronoun that refers back to some subject. The subject would already be known, and this pronoun would refer back to that subject. Now, because this pronoun always is referring back to a subject, it can never be the subject, and that's why there's no nominative case. This pronoun sui can never be a subject, and therefore there's no nominative case. The basic meaning of this pronoun is, if you simply think of it as the English word self. Self. And think of all the different ways you see this in English. Myself, yourself, ourself, himself, herself, itself, themselves, and so on. If you think of self in the singular and selves in the plural, this pronoun will be simple enough. When we use self and selves in English, we're referring back to a subject that we've already named. For example, if I say, I treated myself to a fancy dinner. Myself is a reflexive pronoun. It refers back to the subject. I treated myself. That's a reflexive pronoun. Caesar glorified himself. Himself is a reflexive pronoun. It tells us that the object and the subject are the same person or thing. And it's easy to remember that we translate sui, sibi, se as self. And we translate in the plural sui, sibi, se as selves. The first part of the pronoun is determined by what the actual subject is. And we'll see that in examples in Latin reading. But that's a quick overview of how the reflexive pronoun works. Now, as for the translation and declension, we see here sui, which means, and I'm going to write this, of blank self, because this part is determined by the subject. It could mean of myself, it could mean of yourself, it could mean of himself, or of herself, or of itself. That depends on what the subject is. Then we have sibi, which means to or for blank self. Se is the accusative blank self. There's no vocative, and then the ablative a se means from blank self. That's the singular declension of sui. The same is true of the plural. Sui will mean of blank selves. Of blank selves. Because this is plural. The dative will mean to or for blank selves. The accusative will mean blank selves. And lastly, the ablative will mean from blank selves. Remember, the first part of the pronoun is going to come from the subject that this reflexive pronoun refers back to. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the declension of the reflexive pronoun sui, sibi, se, se. Now, we saw before that there are first person personal pronouns, second person personal pronouns, and third person personal pronouns. What about sui? What about this reflexive pronoun? Is it first person, second person, or third person? The answer is it's all of the persons. It can be first person, it can be second person, and it can be third person because it simply refers back to the subject. Okay? That's the reflexive pronoun sui, sibi, se, se. Now let's zoom out, and as I said before, we've seen so far the first person personal pronouns, the second person personal pronouns, the crazy reflexive pronouns, and now all of these are basically third person personal pronouns. Let's take a look at these declensions. Let's zoom in to this first declension. Now we've already seen this before. Here we have the singular. Make sure you notice here that the singular is in view. We have the nominative forms hic, haik or hek, and hok. Hic, hek, hok. And this pronoun is a demonstrative pronoun because it points out a subject or object, and it translates as this. Hic vir, this man. Hek femina, this woman. And hok is the neuter. Hic, hek, and hok. The genitive huius is the same for all three genders. It means of this. The dative huic is also the same for all three genders. The accusative, we have hunk for the masculine, hank for the feminine, and hok for the neuter. And then in the ablative, we have ab, hok, ab, hak, and ab, hok. So for the masculine, we have hic, huius, huic, hunk, hok. For the feminine, we have hek, huius, huic, hank, hak. And for the neuter, we have hok, huius, huic, hok, hok. That's the declension of the singular of the pronoun hic, hek, hok. Now let's slide over to the right and we can see the plural. Here we have the plural for the same pronoun. The plural masculine is he. That means these, and it's masculine. The genitive plural horum means of these. His means to or for these. Hos means these, the accusative plural. And here we see ab his, from these. That's the masculine ablative plural. Those are the masculine forms. He, horum, his, hos, his. The feminine forms, we have hai or he. That's the nominative feminine plural. We then have the genitive plural harum, harum. We then have his for the dative, has, these, feminine, for the accusative, and ab his for the ablative. And then lastly on the right we have the neuter forms. We have hek, the neuter plural, don't get that confused with the feminine singular. We then have in the genitive plural, horum, of these, neuter. We then go over to the dative, his, to or for these. We then have hek as the accusative plural, and his again as the ablative plural. So for the masculine, we have he, horum, his, hos, his. For the feminine, we have he, harum, his, has, his. And for the neuter, we have hek, horum, his, hek, his. That's the declension of hic, hek, hoc in the singular and now in the plural. So they are going across. We just declined hic, hek, and hoc. So I'll write hic right here. And we saw the singular and the plural forms. Okay? Now let's continue down to the next pronoun. We have iste, ista, istud. And it's important for us, whenever we think of iste, to compare it with ille. Both iste and ille mean that. So hic means this. Iste and ille mean that. But they have a different meaning and a different use. Usually, iste means that which is close to the person being spoken to. It has the idea of saying that next to you. Iste. Ille has the idea of that at a distance. That over there. Hic is this here. Iste, that, next to you. And ille, that, over there. So remember that when you consider hic, iste, and ille. What you'll notice is that iste and ille look very much alike in their declension. So if you learn the declension of iste, you've pretty much learned the declension of ille. All you have to change is the stem from ist to il. The endings are the same. So let's walk through the declension of iste. And as I said, once we learn iste, we'll also know ille. In the masculine, the nominative singular, we have iste. And then in the genitive singular, we have istius. And notice the ius ending in the genitive, just like we had with huius above. Iste, istius. In the dative, we have isti. In the accusative, we have istum. And then in the ablative, we have ab, isto. So for the masculine singular, we have iste, istius, isti, istum, isto. And remember, this pronoun means that of yours, or that near you. The feminine, we see ista in the singular nominative, and then we go over to istius for the genitive and isti for the dative, then istam for the accusative, and ista for the ablative. Ista, istius, isti, istam, ista. And then lastly, the neuter. Istud for the neuter singular nominative, istud, then istius, then isti for the dative, then back to istud for the accusative, and isto, just like the masculine, for the neuter ablative. And there we have the declension of iste, ista, and istud. And once you have that memorized, remember, it's almost the same. Actually, it is the same, except for the stem of ile, illa, ilud. Okay? Let's go look at the plural forms. And once again, once we learn the declension of isti, istai, ista, we'll also know the declension of illi, illai, illa, because they're the same. All that differs is that the stem is ist for the first pronoun and ill for the second pronoun. The endings are the same. For the nominative plural, masculine, we see isti. For the genitive, istorum. For the dative, istis. Accusative, istos. And ablative, ab istis. Isti, istorum, istis, istos, istis. For the feminine, we have iste, istarum for the genitive, then over to istis in the dative, istas in the accusative, and istis for the ablative. And for the neuter, we have ista in the nominative plural, istorum in the genitive plural, istis in the dative plural, ista, same as the nominative, in the accusative plural, and then istis in the ablative plural. And again, once we learn them, we know all the declension of ili, ile, illa, because the endings are the same. So that brings us through those first pronouns. Hic, iste, and ile. And you should know the meaning of those three pronouns now. These are three third-person pronouns. Next up, at the bottom of the page here, we see ipse. And ipse is another strange pronoun because it can be first person, second person, or third person. Ipse, like sui, which we studied before, is usually translated as blank self again. So ipse normally is found translated as himself, ipsa as herself, and ipsum as itself. But it can be first, second, or third person. For example, if I say ego ipse, that means I, myself. If I say Maria ipsa, that means Mary herself. And if I say templum ipsum, I mean the temple itself. So it has an idea like a reflexive pronoun, but it's not really a reflexive pronoun. It's a demonstrative pronoun. And the reason why I can say that is because it has, it has nominative forms. So it's not like the reflexive pronoun. It's simply usually translated with the ending self, as we saw the reflexive pronoun can be. The declension is very much the same as iste and ille, except for the neuter. Rather than this ud ending, we see a um ending. That's pretty much the only difference between the pronouns iste, ille, and ipse. Just watch for those neuter forms. Over in the plural, we see exactly the same declensions. We see isti, illi, and ipsi. We see iste, ille, and ipse, ista, illa, ipsa. If you know the declension of isti, iste, ista, you also know the declension of illi and ipsi, because their endings are the same. Now if we scroll down to the next page, we can see that we still have an entire page of declensions left to study. So let's end this video here, and you can work on that first set of pronoun declensions, and when you've finished memorizing them, you can move to the second part of this lesson, where we'll study the declensions on the second page of the lesson. I hope that's a helpful guide so far through these pronoun declensions. If you have any questions, please ask. Contact me anytime if you'd like to understand these things better and have a question that's holding you up. But be sure to memorize these, be able to translate them easily from Latin into English and from English into Latin, and use the quizzes on your lesson to help you do so. God bless your studies.